June 26, 1941. Near the town of Raseiniai, Lithuania. The air shimmered with the heat of burning fields. On the ground, a column of German Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks rolled east, their treads grinding over blackened soil. Dust rose like smoke, coating everything in a grey film. The soldiers of 4th Panzer Group, veterans of France and Poland, were confident. Russia, they believed, would fall like the others. From the cupola of his panzer, Lieutenant Hans Kruger spat into the dirt. Another village ahead. Bet they'll send tractors again, he joked, remembering the thin-skinned Soviet light tanks that their armour-piercing shells had torn apart with ease. Laughter rippled through the convoy. Then, a sound. A low, throaty roar from above. Unlike the sharp whine of German Stukas, the men craned their necks. Out of the haze came a formation of planes, low, slow and broad-winged, their undersides gleaming dull grey-green. Kruger squinted. "What are those?" "Crop dusters." "Russian flying coffins," another shouted. "Suicidal idiots!" But the laughter died the moment the first Il-2 Sturmovik opened fire. The roar of its V12 AM-38 engine was deafening as it dove straight toward the column, cannons blazing. A hail of 23mm rounds ripped through the lead truck. It exploded in a fireball. Seconds later, 2 more Sturmoviks swept in, releasing RS-82 rockets that streaked across the field like fiery spears. One rocket struck a Panzer broadside, blasting it into a fountain of earth and flame. Kruger ducked inside his tank, shouting, "Flak! Where's the damn flak?" But there was none, not this far forward. The Sturmoviks passed low enough that the Germans could see the red stars on their wings, and the dark, armoured shell around the cockpit glinting like the carapace of an insect. Then they climbed sharply, banked, and came again. Within minutes, the column was wrecked. Trucks ablaze, tanks flipped, ammunition cooking off. Kruger's driver, his face bleeding, stared upward in disbelief. "They said the Russians couldn't fly," he muttered. From that day, the men of the 4th Panzer Group learned a new sound to fear. The growl of a Soviet Il-2. July 1941. Smolensk front. The German advance was stalling. The once smooth blitzkrieg machine had started to choke on dust, mud, and unexpected resistance. And above the smoking landscape, the Il-2 Sturmovik returned, again and again. Inside one of those aircraft sat Sergeant Ivan Petrov, 23 years old, a farmhand from Saratov turned ground attack pilot. His cockpit was a furnace. The armoured shell surrounding him, 12mm thick, trapped heat like an oven, but also saved his life. Around him, tracer rounds zipped past, pinging harmlessly off the armoured plating. "Hold her steady, Vanya!" shouted his rear gunner, Mikhail Sorokin, over the crackling intercom. "Panzers! 11 o'clock!" Ivan dipped the nose. Below, the battlefield stretched like a painting of chaos. Wrecked vehicles, burning oil, and the silhouettes of German tanks moving through wheat fields. He lined up the sights. Rockets away! 4 RS-132 rockets streaked from the wings. A second later, 2 impacts bloomed in orange. The explosion flipped a truck, scattered soldiers, and sent a panzer veering off the road. Machine gun fire erupted from below, but Ivan didn't flinch. He pressed the trigger again. The VIA-23 cannons thundered, each shell tearing through metal like paper. When he finally pulled up, Mikhail shouted, half laughing, half weeping, "They called us flying coffins, eh? Let them crawl in theirs." They weren't wrong about the nickname. The Il-2's losses were staggering. Many squadrons saw only half their pilots return from a single mission, with no armour protecting the tail section or gunner in early versions. German Messerschmitt Bf-109s cut them down mercilessly. Pilots joked grimly that the Il-2 was made of armour in the front, plywood in the back. But what made the Sturmovik terrifying wasn't its survivability, it was its persistence. For every Il-2 destroyed, the Soviets built another, sometimes in under 48 hours. Women worked night shifts at the Kuibyshev and Ural factories, riveting armor plates by hand, their faces lit by the glow of welders. By autumn 1942, the skies over the Eastern Front swarmed with the aircraft the Germans once mocked. At Stalingrad, their presence became constant, the haunting wail of engines before dawn, the flash of rockets at noon, and the thunder of cannon fire at dusk. Oberfeldwebel Josef Kraus, a veteran tank commander near Kallach, described it in his diary. They come in pairs or threes, out of the sun. We hide under trees, but they find us. The rockets scream like banshees. Our guns cannot reach them. They are devils made of iron. The Luftwaffe tried to counter them, dispatching fighters in mass rotor formations. But the Soviets adapted. They flew in tight pairs, each Il-2 covering the other's blind spots. It wasn't elegant like the German Stuka. It was brutal, unrelenting, a hammer of steel and fire. By the end of 1942, German units began to refer to the Il-2 not as a joke, but with grim reverence. Schwarzer Tod, Black Death. And as winter closed in on Stalingrad, that name would earn its place in legend. November 1942. The Volga River lay frozen beneath a steel grey sky. From above, Stalingrad looked like a corpse, a city of shattered bones and smoking ruins. Inside that labyrinth of rubble, men fought like ghosts, house to house, floor to floor. But over the thunder of artillery, another sound rose. The deep, growling roar of engines. The Il-2 Sturmoviks were coming. Captain Nikolai Voronov, squadron leader of the 807th Shei-Po Assault Aviation Regiment, led his formation through the low clouds. His windshield was smeared with oil and frost. The heating system had failed hours ago. But his focus was unbroken. Below, through the haze, he spotted the flicker of muzzle flashes. German artillery, massed near the tractor factory. "Target sighted," he radioed, and "We go in." 8 Il-2s dropped through the clouds like hawks, engines howling. The first volley of rockets streaked toward the German lines, exploding in clusters of black and orange. Seconds later, 23mm cannon shells shredded the anti-aircraft positions. The air filled with shrapnel and snow, men screaming beneath the falling debris. On the ground, Sergeant Ernst Hoffmann of the 16th Panzer Division clutched his helmet as the attack hit. The sound was unbearable. The roar of the engines, the shriek of rockets, the concussive blast of explosions. His command post, a wrecked warehouse, disintegrated as a direct hit turned it into a storm of glass and brick. When Hoffmann crawled out, his radio operator was gone, buried under a sheet of corrugated steel. He stumbled toward the trench, shouting for his men, but the sky erupted again. The Il-2s were looping around for a second strike. This time, they flew even lower, barely 50 meters above the ground, their shadow passing over the wrecks like vultures. The gunners in the rear seats unleashed streams of tracer fire into the panicked infantry below. The smell of burning oil and flesh mingled with the cold, metallic tang of blood. One German officer screamed into his field phone, "We cannot hold. They bomb us day and night. They never stop." He wasn't exaggerating. By December, the Soviet Air Force had achieved near total air superiority over the cauldron of Stalingrad. The Il-2s became the hammer that broke the German Sixth Army's backbone, destroying supply convoys, smashing artillery batteries, and turning any movement in daylight into suicide. To the trapped Germans, it felt as though the very sky belonged to the enemy. To the Soviets, it was justice. A captured German officer later recalled, "We used to fear the Stuka's siren, but the Il-2, it didn't scream. It growled. It hunted. It killed without warning." In the final days of the siege, when the Red Army encircled the Germans in Operation Uranus, Sturmoviks attacked relentlessly, day after day, hour after hour. Fuel depots erupted, horse-drawn wagons scattered. Even when anti-aircraft fire finally brought one Il-2 down, another seemed to rise in its place. By February 1943, as General Friedrich Paulus surrendered the remnants of his army, the wrecks of tanks and trucks around Stalingrad lay charred, silent testimony to what the Germans now called der Schwarze Tod. And yet, the war, and the Il-2's legend, was far from over. July 5, 1943, dawn broke over the rolling plains near Prokhorovka, painting the sky in pale gold. But the calm was a lie. In a few hours, it would become the stage for the largest tank battle in human history, Operation Citadel. On the ground, over 3,000 German Panzers, Tigers, Panthers, and assault guns lined up in precise formation. Engines rumbled like distant thunder. The air shimmered with exhaust and anticipation. From his Panzer IV, Oberleutnant Walter Frey adjusted his goggles and muttered, "We'll crush them by nightfall." Then the sound came, distant at first, like rolling thunder, but it grew, filling the sky. One of Frey's gunners looked up and froze. Mein Gott! Over the horizon, waves of black silhouettes emerged from the morning haze. Il-2 Sturmoviks, hundreds of them, flying low and tight in arrowhead formations. The sun glinted off their steel armor, their red stars flashing like drops of blood in the light. At their head flew Major Anna Yegorova, one of the most decorated female pilots of the 805th Assault Regiment. She had flown more than 240 missions and survived being shot down twice. Her voice crackled through the radio. "Comrades, remember Stalingrad. Strike hard. For the motherland." The first wave dove in, releasing salvos of RS-132 rockets. Trails of smoke streaked across the sky. Explosions rippled through the German front line. Trucks flipped, fuel depots erupted, and ammunition carts went up in roaring flames. The air turned black with smoke and dust. Frey's tank shook violently as a rocket exploded nearby. "Driver, reverse! Reverse!" he shouted. But before they could move, another Sturmovik swept in, guns blazing. The 23mm rounds tore through the engine deck, sending fragments flying. Inside, men screamed as fire spread across the compartment, all around chaos. German anti-aircraft guns opened fire, the sky blossoming with black puffs of flak. Yet the Sturmoviks kept coming, low, fast, relentless. For every one that fell, two more appeared, Soviet fighters, Yak-9s and Lay-5s, tangled with German Messerschmitts overhead, leaving twisting trails of smoke like scars across the sky. The German front commander, General Hermann Hoth, watched the carnage from a forward observation post. He slammed his fist against the map table. "Our tanks are burning before they even reach the line. Damn these iron devils." By midday, the battlefield was a vision of hell. Smoking craters, shattered armor, and the charred remains of what had been the Wehrmacht's most powerful assault force. The Luftwaffe, overstretched and outnumbered, could no longer provide cover. Meanwhile, Soviet tank crews advanced behind the Sturmovik's barrage, cheering as they saw German columns break apart. The Il-2 had become not just an aircraft, but the spearhead of Soviet combined warfare. Wherever it appeared, morale soared. Soldiers on the ground called it the flying artillery of the Red Army. By the end of the battle, the German offensive at Kursk was shattered. Nearly 300 tanks lay destroyed or abandoned, many still smouldering in fields where the Sturmoviks had struck first. A German survivor wrote later, "The Sturmovik owned the sky that day. We had no answer. The more we fired, the more they came. It was as if Russia herself had grown wings. The tide of war had turned. The Il-2, once mocked as a slow, clumsy flying coffin, was now the hammer of vengeance, pounding the Wehrmacht from the Volga to the Vistula. But beyond its steel and smoke, the Sturmovik carried something more enduring, the unbreakable will of the people who built and flew it. Autumn 1944, eastern Poland. The front had shifted hundreds of miles west. German divisions were retreating now, burning bridges and cities as they fell back toward the Reich. Overhead, the thunder of Il-2 Sturmoviks echoed across the sky almost daily. as familiar to Soviet infantry as the crack of rifles or the rumble of Katyusha rockets. From his cockpit, Captain Ivan Petrov, the same pilot who had once braved the skies above Smolensk, now led a squadron of veterans through the thick grey clouds. His plane bore scars from a dozen missions: patched armour, bullet pocks, the faint outline of old red stars repainted over soot. Below, the Vistula River glistened like a blade under the pale sun. German flak guns barked from the opposite bank, black smoke bursting in angry clusters. "Hold formation!" Ivan called out, his voice steady despite the flak bursts. For those who never came back, the Il-2s broke through the cloud layer in a tight diamond, the earth rushing up beneath them. A column of German armour appeared, tigers and panthers massing for a counterattack. Ivan lined up his sights. "Rockets! Away!" Streaks of fire leapt from the Sturmovik's wings. Explosions rippled through the German line. One panther cartwheeled into the air, another burned, its turret blown clean off. Infantry scattered like ants as 23mm shells shredded trucks and gun positions. From the ground, Soviet soldiers raised their rifles and shouted in awe, "Black Death! The angels of vengeance!" For the Germans, it was terror made mechanical. Sergeant Helmut Schneider, crouched behind a wrecked half-track, described it later. "You don't see them until it's too late. They come out of the sun, screaming down like demons. And when they pass, nothing is left standing." As the Red Army surged toward Warsaw, the Sturmovik became the sound of inevitability. Its howl meant the front was moving forward, and that the Wehrmacht's days were numbered. By 1945, over 36,000 Il-2s had been built, the single most produced combat aircraft in history. Entire regiments flew them, men and women alike. Some pilots flew up to 300 missions before the war's end. When Berlin finally fell in May 1945, Il-2 squadrons circled the smoking city in victory flyovers, their shadows sweeping over the Reichstag ruins like black wings of fate. Ivan Petrov survived the war, though his plane did not. It was hit by flak near Kustrin in April. He crash-landed in a field of mud and fire, crawling out as his aircraft burned behind him. To the day he died, he carried a small piece of its armour, melted and scarred, in his jacket pocket. At his funeral years later, his daughter placed that fragment on his coffin and whispered, "He flew the wings of the motherland." In the end, the Germans' mockery became their prophecy. Yes, the Il-2 was a flying coffin, but not for the men and women who flew it, for those beneath its shadow.